Welcome to BizBuySell's Buying a Small Business presentation. We will provide you with practical steps and rules of thumb around the process of buying a small business. My name is Luba Kagan. I'm a Strategic Partners Manager at BizBuySell, and I'm honored to be joined by Ed Pendarvis, who is the oracle and veteran of small business buying and selling. Welcome, Ed. Ed, I wanted to dive right in and set the stage for our listeners on the difference between big business and small Main Street business. In my almost 15 years of buying and investing into small businesses, I've seen a huge difference, a disconnect, and a lot of misunderstanding around how to look at and evaluate a small business.
That's so important, Lou, but it's not surprising. Everything you study in school and business schools and things, everything you see on television, newspaper, is all about big business, publicly traded companies, and stock market companies, we call them. And we dealing with small business, what we call Main Street business, that are privately owned, and there's a huge difference. And a couple of the differences we'll mention just getting the rules, setting the ground rules a little bit today. One is a big business, publicly traded company. They've got two ways of making money. Let's take Coca-Cola, for instance. They've got a wonderful company, but they got two ways of making money. They sell their product or service all over the country, all over the world, and that's one way of making money. And the second way of making money is they sell corporate shares of stock. So if they sell 1 million shares of stock, $30 a share, whatever the stock value is, that's a whole barrel of money they just made selling stock, as well as selling their product or service. We come down Main Street business, there's only one way of making a living, or making earnings, and that's through selling their product or service. They're not selling shares of stock. And two huge things that are different is since you're selling shares of stock, the publicly traded company wants to show earnings, wants to show how well we're doing, and they want you to buy their stock. A privately held business, they sell in their product or service, you don't buy the shares of stock. And so the financial records of a big business are done to show how well they're doing. But let me get you to think about this. Most folks that work for a big company, they've seen their prospectus and their annual meeting and their good information on how well they're doing stock-wise, but you've never seen their tax returns. You never will. That's why General Electric can make $5.2 billion in pre-tax profits. And when they work it through their tax return, they end up paying no taxes because there's no profit. A small business, their financial records are primarily done to minimize taxes. They aren't done to sell the business. And so in looking at a business, you're going to find that there's a lot of information in the financial data, but you have to know what you're looking at.
Correct. And also financial terms are always confusing. There is a difference, everyone in corporate world knows what EBITDA is, what it stands for. But if you ask a business owner that's operating a great business, but a small business, what's your EBITDA? They may look at you and say, well,
what are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
In our world of small business, instead of EBITDA, which is earnings for interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, what we deal with, the real earnings of business, we call it seller's discretionary earnings. Sometimes we call it seller's discretionary cash flow. Oftentimes I refer to it just owner's benefit. In other words, if I sat in your chair, Mr. Owner, and I ran the business like you run it, did about the same amount of sales you did last year, same basic expenses, how much could it make? Because that's what a buyer wants to know is, if I buy this business, how much can it make? And we're going to show you how to arrive at that in this webinar.
Fantastic. So let's start with first things first. How do you start? Where do you start?
Well, this is a great place right here where we are at BizBuySell. BizBuySell is by far the largest, has 47,000 businesses listed around the country and around the world, and a great deal of information based on comparables and things. And you can narrow down to the area you're looking at, the type of business you're looking at, sales, the size of businesses based on sales and based on earnings and price ranges. But you're not interested in 47,000, you're interested in your area and the type of business you're looking at, and that's what we're going to address a little bit today. The best place to start is BizBuySell.
What are some other resources? What are some other venues of getting the businesses?
I'm a big advocate of most of the listings are handled by business brokers that work for the seller and have listed the business. And you see a business you're interested in, I'm a big advocate of getting in touch with that broker and going to see the broker, but we'll talk about that a little more. But focus on companies that are listed that you're interested in. The International Business Brokers Association has got a lot of good information, and their local affiliates of the IBBA, such as California Association of Business Brokers, Texas Association of Business Brokers. And sometimes you'll have for sale by owner. The process of buying a business is what we're talking about today, and it's important that you follow this process. If you look, say, at the medical profession, the process is you've got examination, diagnosis, and then prescription. You can't prescribe something if you hadn't examined that. And looking at a business, I don't think you ought to either decide to buy it or not buy it if you hadn't at least looked at the business. That's the first step that we're going to take, and we'll follow that too with Dale.
So would you say that the heart of the search process, our buyers really need to understand that it's learn, filter, and ask more questions, and it's an iterative process. And here we've provided initial set of filters that you want to consider as you are searching through the businesses.
Look at a business, it's established, it's usually a lot better than a startup. It already has trained employees, a customer base, and cash flow. It has a product or service that's proven itself in the market. And very importantly, that owner has made a living out of that business for 3, 5, or 15 years. Look at the size and range of the business. Does it provide an income range that would work for you? Is it in the price range that would work for you? It can be negotiated in terms and conditions that might work for you. Will it provide a lifestyle that would work? And one question I always ask too, is very important, is we want to know why the seller is selling that business. If it's such a good business, how come it's for sale? And we always ask that, and we want to know that, so do you. When you have identified some businesses that are interesting to you, one of the things I'm going to suggest you do and challenge you to do, quite frankly, is get from behind that computer and just getting information on the business. Because when you ask for information on the business, normally what's sent to you is the financial information. As we said earlier, that financial information was primarily done to minimize taxes. Not sure how well the business is doing. And we may even have recast the information and things there. But it's so important to go see the business. And you're just looking at financial data, you'll never buy anything, because that doesn't show you the emotional involvement that's involved in going and putting your work life in a business 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you want to go see the business and see if it might work for you. So call the broker, email the broker to get further information on the business that you're interested in. You probably have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That's fine. And if you're interested, though, go see the broker. That's the biggest mistake I think people make, is they just get the financial information and say, well, this doesn't make sense. They're asking too much. I don't have that much. And the financials, I can't see where they're making enough money. So go see the broker, and very important, go see the business. Go see the business. Start with the fact that it's making somebody a living that wouldn't still be in business, and see if it might work for you. Ask some more questions of the seller and the broker, and evaluate whether or not it'll work for you in your initial assessment. Learn enough on the initial information to eliminate the business if it's not something you're interested in, or drill down deeper if it is something that you're interested in.
I guess it's important for our buyers to know that at this stage, you're just trying to learn enough to eliminate on these initial filters. There is no way you can learn everything right away, and it's only preliminary due diligence.
That's exactly right, and that's why I invite people to go look at several businesses perhaps and do some comparison shopping there.
It's a law of large numbers, and you need to look at a number of businesses to even understand what are you looking for, what do you want to...
What is the best opportunity for you? You have to go out on some dates, so you'll never get married. You got to go on that first date.
We've provided here additional filters, like deeper filters. These are certainly the questions that I've constantly asked when I've been buying businesses over my 15 years of experience. We can drill into each one of these questions, and it'll be its own webinar. For the interest of time, we wanted to share this information so you have it as you're going through this process. But unfortunately, unless we do another 3, 4 webinars, we won't be able to get into these.
One of the big things of this, though, I invite people, it's very important. An existing business normally has an immediate cash flow. That's a critical issue to a buyer. Because what you're buying is you're buying earnings. No matter what type of business it is, you need to make a living out of that business. And an existing business should have an immediate cash flow. We'll talk about that. One of the 3 areas, or main areas of focus that I suggest you look at, looking at a business a little bit, is I always tell people, focus on the business, not financials, except what financials tell you. What I mean by that, if you look at the business, if you don't like it, quite frankly, it doesn't matter what the financials show. You see what I mean? You're not going to buy a house you don't like. You're not going to buy a car you don't like. You're not going to marry a woman you don't like, or man. You're not going to buy a business you don't like either. So that's one of the first steps to focus on there. When you do look at the financials, which certainly you will, look at the top line, gross sales, not the bottom line. Bottom line has been done to minimize taxes. That number may not be appropriate at all. What we're looking at the bottom line, we're talking about the real bottom line is earnings, owner's benefit. That's not in the financials that we look at the tax return. The top line, though, does give you the trend of sales and the volume of sales, and that's very important. What I found is a pretty good rule of thumb is you can make 10 to 20% on your gross sales. That's the ballpark. So somebody shows they're doing gross sales of $400,000 a year, you can make $40,000 to $80,000 perhaps. Doing $600,000, $60,000 to $120,000. And if the seller represents that that's what they're making, that's probably so, subject to your further due diligence. And then very importantly, focus on what you're going to do with the business after you buy. I always invite buyers to do that. Don't just look at what they've done with it. You can't change how they've run the business the last 15 years or nickel. What you can change is what you're going to do with the business after you buy it. Look at Ray Kroc when he bought McDonald's. He didn't start McDonald's. He bought an existing business, and then he developed it into the huge corporation it is. I invite you to do the same thing. Look at it. What are you going to do with the business? That's probably the most important thing. In fact, if I were to suggest that you weigh the decision, I'd say put way more, 70% of the weight on what you're going to do with the business after you buy it, rather than about 30% of what the seller's done with it. I can't change that at all. I can change what we do with it.
Because ultimately you're buying future earnings, future earning potential.
The actual definition of what's the value of a business is the perceived value of the future earnings. And so look at that, because that's where your value is from owning that business. And remember, if a business has been around 3 to 5 years or longer, 19 years, it's making somebody a living, they wouldn't still be in business. So they're paying the rent every month, they're paying the employees every week, it's a well-stocked store, it's a well-run business. That's the value of an existing business to sell, and look at it from that standpoint. Rule of thumb, too, is probably the biggest question a buyer wants to ask is, if I buy this business, if I buy this job, how much can I make? And the answer to that really starts out with 3 specific steps. One is identifying how much the seller is making now, not for tax purposes, but the real cash flow, real earnings of the business. And that's where that 10 to 20% rule gives you a kind of rule of thumb, basics for what you should be able to make out of the business. Then, of course, it would be less whatever the new debt service is in your purchase, whether you owe money back to the bank or Uncle Charles or to the seller. That would be a debt service that's now not being paid, so you'd be less that. But then, very importantly, plus what the buyer is going to do to improve the business going forward. And if you would use those 3 steps, that'll give you a pretty good idea of what your earnings would be. An example I got there, we're right familiar with food service and restaurants and things there. This is where I'm getting that 10 to 20% rule. Let's just say you got gross sales of $1 million on a restaurant. Food costs are usually about 30%, so it's $300,000. Labor costs is about 30%, $300,000. Your rent factor is normally about 10% of gross sales, ballpark of there. And your administrative costs, that's insurance, advertising, electric bill, anything not those other expenses, another about 10%. Well, that's 30, 60, 70, 80% of expenses already gone. So what's left to the owner for owning the business is that 10 to 20%, potentially. Now, if you've got a manager to run it, they run an absentee, they might not be making any money much. But usually if you run that business right, that's the potential earnings of a business is 10 to 20% of its gross sales.
It's a great rule of thumb to remember.
And a lot of time too, another question that always comes up is, what's the value of a business? What pricing and things should I use that?
That question comes up consistently and always, and it's a mystery, and it's not a science, it's an art, but we would love to get your wisdom around what are the rule of thumb for small businesses in terms of valuations and pricing of the business.